Colonel Brianna Stone, a U.S. Army officer, is pulled over by a racist cop who doesn't recognize her rank. The officer, full of entitlement and arrogance, assumes that she doesn't belong. Brianna handles the situation with silent strength, exposing his prejudice without uttering a word. The chapter ends with the officer's internal collapse as he learns who she really is, setting up the power shift to come. "We don't hire people like you." The words sliced through the warm afternoon air as if they were meant to cut straight to Brianna's core. The sirens wailed, a loud screeching crescendo in her rearview mirror. Brianna's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but her face remained calm, a study in control. She could feel the tension already building. Another routine stop, another officer who thought they knew her before even seeing her face. The officer approached the window, his uniform crisp, his demeanor one of entitlement. His boots made sharp, rhythmic sounds against the asphalt as he walked. The badge on his chest shined in the sunlight, but it wasn't the light that reflected off it that made Brianna's gaze shift. It was the arrogance with which he wore it. Brianna didn't flinch when he stopped beside her car. Didn't change. Her posture, she simply waited. "License and registration," the officer barked, his voice thick with condescension. She didn't move at first. The officer leaned down, peering through the window, his eyes scanning her face. A moment of hesitation, then his sneer deepened. "You're in a neighborhood you don't belong in," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for her to hear. She could feel the heat of his judgment settle over her like an oppressive weight. She knew the drill. This wasn't the first time she'd been looked at as if she was out of place. Brianna slid her hand over to the glove compartment and pulled out her license and registration, her movements deliberate, almost too slow for his liking. "Problem. Officer?" Her voice was steady, unbothered. He took the papers from her, his fingers brushing against hers. There it was again, that slight underestimation. He looked at the papers, then back at her, his eyes narrowing. He scanned her face once more, as if trying to confirm what his instincts were telling him. She wasn't meant to be in this place. "Don't act like you don't know," he said, his tone harsher now, full of a kind of bitter superiority that made Brianna's spine straighten even further. Brianna did not blink. She held his gaze, watching his expression falter as he wrestled with what he thought was her place in the world versus the truth of who she was. His lip curled. "You don't belong here. People like you don't." His words trailed off as he finally glanced down at her ID. Her name. It hit him like a brick to the chest. The officer froze. She noticed it immediately, his eyes widening, the faintest hint of realization creeping into his face. He stumbled, almost dropping the papers as he read her title. Brianna leaned back, slightly, her eyes never leaving his. The officer's internal collapse was already beginning. He had been so sure, so certain of his judgment, of his superiority, and now he was forced to reckon with the truth. "I think you should Google me," Brianna said, her voice now a quiet power. Her words were calm, but there was weight behind them that made the officer stiffen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He was scrambling now, lost in the discomfort of his own inadequacy. Are you kidding me?" the officer finally muttered, his face turning red. Brianna didn't respond. She simply watched him, her steady, composed presence the antithesis of his rising panic. The balance of power had shifted and he knew it. He was no longer the one holding authority in this situation. Without another word, she rolled up her window. The officer stood there, paralyzed by the sudden unraveling of everything he thought he knew. Brianna put the car in gear, and with a soft hum of the engine, she pulled away. Behind her, the officer stood motionless, the weight of his own arrogance crashing down around him. The officer had underestimated Brianna, but the reckoning had only just begun. Little did he know, he wasn't the only one who had underestimated her. There were far bigger battles waiting for Brianna, and now she was ready for them. Brianna pulled into her apartment complex, the soft purr of her car's engine the only sound in the quiet of the evening. Her mind, however, was far from peaceful. She had hoped the traffic stop would be just another fleeting moment. But it wasn't. The officer's face kept replaying in her head, his arrogance, his judgment, his disbelief when he saw her name. It wasn't just about him. It was about everything he represented. She parked the car, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. The world outside her window seemed so ordinary. Yet in that brief interaction, she had seen just how deep the systemic rot ran, even within her own ranks. Brianna exhaled slowly and stepped out, her boots clicking against the concrete as she walked to her front door. The weight of it all, the responsibility, the challenge, pressed down on her shoulders, but she held her head high. She had dealt with this her entire career. This wouldn't be the moment that broke her. Inside, she tossed her bag on the couch and paced around the small living room, her mind racing through her options. The officer's actions were not isolated. She knew that. This was the symptom of a much larger problem, a problem that she had been fighting against for years, though it had never been as blatant as today. Brianna went to her desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved the small stack of files she had been compiling over the years. They were filled with records of incidents, notes, and reports of racial bias, unfair treatment, and systemic barriers. She had written them off as isolated cases before, convinced that if she worked hard enough, changed enough minds, and climbed high enough in the ranks, the system would eventually shift. But today's encounter broke that illusion. She knew better now. The fight wasn't just about changing individual minds. It was about dismantling a system that had built itself on these biases, a system that had been broken long before she even entered it. And now it was time to confront it head-on. She sat at her desk and began typing an email to her contacts in higher offices, people who had power and influence, but also had a reputation for standing on the right side of history. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew that, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. Later that night, Brianna sat at the kitchen table, the flickering light from her laptop the only illumination in the darkened room. She had drafted her message, but as she stared at the screen, she couldn't help but question everything. She had lived through these kinds of challenges before. She had seen racism even in the military, but never quite like this. She had always been the exception, the one they didn't expect. But now it was clear that the system she had dedicated, her life to, had its own biases, its own inherent flaws. She hit send. The wait began. The next morning, Brianna received an unexpected response. The email was from a high-ranking official she had once respected, someone who had been in the service long before her. They had always been an advocate for equal treatment, someone who had fought for diversity initiatives within the military. She opened the message. "I've heard about the incident. I want to help. But this is a sensitive issue. I advise caution. There are forces at play here that you don't fully understand. Be careful." Brianna read it again, slowly. The warning didn't surprise her. The fear in the message did. The idea that even someone with that much influence was reluctant to help spoke volumes. She had anticipated resistance, but not this level of institutional fear. The message was clear. The powers that be were protecting their own. Even the allies she had hoped to rely on had limits. That was the reality she was facing. The system was rigged, and there were far more obstacles ahead than she had originally believed. By the time Brianna walked into the office, the weight of the previous days had settled into her bones. She wasn't surprised when her commanding officer, Colonel Davis, approached her, his face drawn tight with concern. "Colonel Stone," he said in his usual clipped tone. "Can we talk?" Brianna turned to face him, her posture straight and unyielding. "Yes, sir." Davis gestured for her to follow him, leading her down a quiet hallway into his office. He closed the door behind them. "I've received some troubling reports," he began, his voice low. "There's talk of an investigation into your actions following the traffic stop. I need to know where you stand on this." Brianna felt her stomach tighten. The investigation wasn't just about the officer anymore. It was about her. She wasn't naive enough to think she wouldn't be scrutinized. She had known the risks when she decided to speak out. But now, facing the weight of institutional pressure, she had to decide how far she was willing to go. "I stand where I always have," Brianna said, her voice steady, "for justice, for equality, and for the truth." Davis looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Be careful, Stone. The department has powerful allies, and you're treading dangerous ground." Brianna nodded. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of any of them. But she also, "I'm not backing down," she said firmly. Davis sighed. "I can't say I support you in this, but I will ensure your safety while you work through this. Just be cautious. This fight is bigger than you think." Brianna's gaze hardened. "I'm aware." As she left Davis's office, Brianna knew she had to act fast. The resistance she was facing wasn't just coming from outside the department. It was embedded in its very structure. The more she dug, the more she realized that the institution she had served faithfully for years was as entrenched in systemic racism as any street corner in America. The fight was bigger than she had ever imagined, and it was only just beginning. The system was closing in on Brianna, and she knew that her every move was being watched. But this time, she wasn't going to back down. The real fight for justice had begun, and she was ready to take on the institution that had once been her home. Brianna sat at her desk, the glow from her laptop illuminating her face in the darkened room. The evidence she had gathered, the financial records, internal communications, and witness accounts, was now ready to be shared with the world. It was time to make her move. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her mind racing. What she was about to do would change everything, but if she hesitated now, it would all be for nothing. The department had tried to silence her, tried to make her feel like the problem. She had endured too much of that. This wasn't just about one racist officer anymore. This was about a system that needed to be torn down. With a sharp breath, Brianna clicked the send button. The email went out to every major news outlet, to legal organizations, and even to the Department of Justice. She had made sure to encrypt the files and protect the data. She wasn't naive. She knew that this was just the beginning. The forces she was up against would try to discredit her, destroy the evidence, and destroy her. But she was ready. Brianna sat back, her hands resting on her desk, her heart pounding. In her chest, she had done it. There was no going back now. The first wave of responses came within minutes. Her phone buzzed incessantly as emails, messages, and notifications flooded in. "Brianna, are you sure about this? Your information is going viral. This is huge. Colonel, you have to be careful. This could destroy everything." The messages were a mix of support and concern. But one thing was certain: the story was spreading like wildfire. The media outlets were the first to pick up the story. Headlines like "U.S. Army Colonel exposes systemic racism in military" and "Evidence of corruption in police force, Black woman takes a stand" flashed across screens everywhere. Brianna's name was now synonymous with defiance, courage, and truth. But with the media frenzy came a dark undercurrent. The department was already mobilizing. She could feel it. The phone calls, the cryptic messages, the threats. They were all part of the plan to break her. By the afternoon, Brianna received a call from Jason. She hadn't spoken to him since their confrontation, but now he was reaching out. "Brianna, you've gone too far." Jason's voice crackled over the phone. "You put yourself in a position you can't come back from." Brianna's grip tightened around the phone. "I'm not backing down. You had your chance to stand with me, Jason. You chose your side. I didn't want this, he continued, his voice pleading. I never meant for it to go this far. But now, the department's coming after you. You're about to lose everything. The department has already lost its credibility. Brianna snapped. This isn't about me anymore. It's about all of us who've been silenced for far too long. Jason fell silent for a moment. Brianna could hear the weight of his regret on the other end of the line, but she didn't feel the need to comfort him. She had bigger things to worry about now. Watch your back, Bree, Jason warned. They'll stop at nothing to shut you down. They'll make you a target, and they won't hesitate to destroy your career. I'm not afraid, she replied firmly. I've already been a target my whole life. I'm not going anywhere. The call ended, but the tension in the air was palpable. Brianna knew Jason was right. The department wasn't going to let this slide. She had exposed something they couldn't control, and now they were going to fight back with everything they had. Later that evening, Brianna watched the news reports in her apartment, her stomach twisting with a mix of anger and determination. The coverage was everywhere, but so was the backlash. The department's PR team was already spinning the story, labeling Brianna's actions as disruptive and unwarranted. They were calling her a rogue officer, someone who didn't understand the complexities of the system. The officer who had pulled her over was being portrayed as the victim, the misunderstood figure who was being attacked for doing his job. Brianna clenched her jaw as she watched the lies unfold. She knew they would try to paint her as the villain. They always did. But what she hadn't expected was how deeply the media would play into their hands. She had always known the media could be manipulated, but this felt different. They weren't just manipulating facts, they were distorting the very truth of what happened. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. This time, it was an email from a colleague in the military. Brianna, this is bigger than you think. There's a meeting tomorrow at the Pentagon. You need to be there. But be careful. Things are moving fast, and not everyone is on your side. Brianna's pulse quickened. A meeting at the Pentagon. She had no idea what it meant, but she knew one thing for sure. The pressure was mounting, and she was in the crosshairs now. The next day, Brianna arrived at the Pentagon, the security around her tighter than usual. She had expected as much. They were keeping a close eye on her now. As she walked through the halls, she could feel the weight of every gaze on her. Her every move was being scrutinized. When she entered the meeting room, she was greeted by a small group of high-ranking officers and government officials. The atmosphere was tense, and it was clear that they had been preparing for this moment. Colonel Stone, one of the officers said, his tone measured but cold. We need to talk about your actions over the past few days. The department has requested a full investigation into your conduct. Brianna stood tall, unflinching. I've already given you everything you need. The truth is out there. Now it's your turn to do something about it. The officer's face hardened. You've gone too far. You're making enemies in places you can't even begin to understand. We have allies in powerful places, people who can make you regret this. Brianna's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. I'm not here for your threats. I'm here to make sure the truth is heard. The officer's lips curled into a sneer. We'll see how long that lasts. The battle for Brianna's career was just beginning. With enemies closing in and the pressure mounting from all sides, she had no choice but to keep moving forward. The truth was on her side, but how much longer would she be able to stand against the powerful forces aligned against her? Brianna walked through the halls of the Pentagon, her mind racing. The meeting with the high-ranking officers had been a warning. They had made it clear. Her career was on the line, and they weren't afraid to destroy her if it meant protecting their own. But Brianna wasn't backing down. She stepped out into the cool evening air, the weight of the conversation still pressing down on her shoulders. The officer's sneering words echoed in her mind. You'll regret this. They were trying to intimidate her, to make her feel small, but Brianna knew better than to let fear control her. She had come too far, and the stakes were far too high now. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from the same anonymous source who had helped her with the initial leak. Brianna opened it immediately. Anonymous. They're going to make their move soon. Watch your back. I have more evidence. Something bigger than you realize. Meet me tonight. Brianna's heart skipped a beat. She had known the department was trying to bury her, but she hadn't realized just how far they were willing to go. This new evidence could be the key to taking down the entire system. She couldn't afford to waste any time. She quickly replied, "Where?" The reply came almost immediately. Old warehouse on 5th and Elme, 10 p.m. Later that night, Brianna stood in front of the rundown warehouse, her eyes scanning the darkened street. She had come alone, against Jason's advice, but she couldn't afford to bring anyone else into this fight. The fewer people who knew what she was doing, the better. She slipped through the warehouse door, her hand resting on the small gun, tucked into her waistband. The air was thick with dust, the floor creaking beneath her feet. The faint sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. "Brianna." A voice called out, its tone hushed but urgent. Brianna turned to find the source, a figure in the shadows, barely visible under the flickering overhead light. "It's me," the voice said again. "Detective Harris." Brianna relaxed, just slightly. She had been expecting someone, but she didn't know who. Harris had been the one who had provided her with the first batch of evidence, and Brianna had grown to trust her. But she also knew that trust could be a dangerous thing in a world like this. "Are you sure about this?" Brianna asked, her voice low. Harris stepped into the light, her face tense with concern. "I've gathered everything. This is the final piece, the smoking gun, so to speak." Brianna felt her pulse quicken as Harris handed her a thick envelope. Sealed tightly with a red wax stamp, it felt heavier than it should have. "What is this?" Brianna asked, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside were several documents, the kind that Brianna had hoped for, but feared would never come. This wasn't just about financial fraud or systemic bias. This was deeper. This was about conspiracy, cover-ups at the highest levels, the names of officers and officials linked to organized crime, illicit dealings, and corrupt practices that reached all the way to the top. "This changes everything," Brianna said quietly, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "This could take down the entire department." Harris nodded, her face grim. "It will, but not without consequences. They'll go after you, Brianna. They'll make sure you disappear." "I'm not afraid of them," Brianna said, her jaw set. Not anymore. The next day, Brianna prepared for the fight of her life. She had all the evidence she needed, but now it was about making sure it didn't disappear into the abyss. She couldn't trust anyone inside the department. She couldn't even trust Jason anymore. This had to be handled carefully, with precision. She reached out to her contacts in the media, ensuring the story would reach the public, the real public, not the one the department controlled. It wasn't just about exposing the corruption. It was about bringing justice to the victims of systemic racism, to everyone who had been crushed under the weight of this institution. But as the hours ticked by, Brianna could feel the walls closing in. The department had already begun its counterattack. The smear campaign had ramped up. News outlets that had once supported her were now questioning her motives. They were trying to paint her as a rogue officer with a personal vendetta, desperate for attention. And yet, the evidence in her hands was irrefutable. By the time she reached the designated press conference, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Brianna stood at the podium, the bright lights blinding her momentarily, but she didn't flinch. She had prepared for this moment. She had known it would come. This was her chance to take control of the narrative. "Thank you for being here," Brianna began, her voice steady but fierce. Today, I'm here to expose the truth about a system that has been broken for far too long. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. For years, I've served in the US Army, believing that the system would protect those who were oppressed. But what I've learned is that the system is the one doing the oppressing. Brianna raised the envelope, showing it to the press. The documents inside were the key to everything. These documents, she continued, reveal the truth about the corruption, the systemic racism, and the criminal dealings within the department. It's not just about one officer. It's about a network of officials who have been profiting from injustice for years. The room was silent as Brianna spoke, the cameras flashing in a blur of light. I won't back down. I won't be silenced. And I will not stop until every last one of these individuals is held accountable for their actions. As Brianna stepped down from the podium, the air in the room seemed to shift. She had taken a stand, and she knew there would be no going back. The department would not let this slide. They would come after her with everything they had, but Brianna was ready. The battle was now in the open. Brianna had made her move, but the forces aligned against her were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to protect their own. Her fight had only Brianna sat in her apartment, the silence suffocating around her. The press conference had come and gone, but the noise from it still reverberated in her head. She had spoken the truth, but now she was paying the price for it. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with multiple notifications. She didn't need to check them. She already knew what they said. News outlets, social media, and colleagues had all weighed in. The response had been overwhelming, but not in the way she had hoped. Her email inbox was flooded with messages, some supportive, others threatening. She opened one from an anonymous source. "You're digging your own grave. Walk away now, or you'll regret it." Another from a government official who had once been an ally. "You've crossed the line, Colonel. The department will make sure you're silenced." Brianna slammed the phone down on the table, frustration boiling over. She had expected pushback, but this, the threats, the intimidation, it was all becoming too much. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't let them win. She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The same city that had turned its back on so many like her. The weight of it all pressed against her chest, but she refused to let it crush her. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Brianna didn't hesitate. She knew who it was. She had been expecting this visit. Opening the door, she found Jason standing in front of her, his face pale and drawn. He had called earlier, but she had ignored him. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face him again. "I need to talk to you," Jason said, his voice low. Brianna stepped aside, allowing him to enter. She didn't want to have this conversation, but she knew it was unavoidable. He sat down, his hands shaking slightly as he ran them through his hair. Brianna stayed silent, her arms crossed over her chest. "I'm sorry, Bri," Jason said, his voice full of regret. "I should have stood by you. I should have helped you, not tried to protect myself. But I didn't know who else to trust. They're making it clear that if I don't cooperate, I'm done. I didn't want to drag you down with me." Brianna's gaze never wavered. "You're trying to save your own skin, Jason. You're not the only one who's been threatened. The difference is I'm not going to back down." He looked away, guilt written all over his face. "You don't understand. They have so much power. The department, the people behind all this, they'll destroy everything you've worked for." "I'm not afraid of them," Brianna said firmly. "I didn't come this far just to back down now. You had your chance, Jason. You made your choice." "I know," he said quietly. "I just wanted to apologize. I was wrong." Brianna didn't respond immediately. She couldn't. There was too much anger inside her, anger at him, at the system, at the injustice. She had trusted Jason, and he had failed her. "I know what they'll do next," Jason said, his voice thick with fear. "They'll go after you. They've already started spreading rumors, trying to paint you as unstable. They'll make sure the evidence disappears. They'll make it all about you, not the truth." Brianna's jaw tightened. "Let them try." Jason stood up, running a hand over his face. "You don't understand. It's not just the department. It's everyone. They'll ruin you." Brianna stared at him, the words of warning sinking in. She had known the risks, but hearing him say it aloud made the danger seem more real, more immediate. But she couldn't let fear control her. She wouldn't let them win. "I've already made my decision, Jason," she said, her voice cold. "I'm not backing down. I'm going to expose the truth no matter what it costs me." Jason's expression softened, and he reached out to touch her arm. "Please be careful. You're making a lot of enemies, Bree. The department's going to come after you with everything they have. You're going to need more than just evidence to survive this." Brianna met his eyes for a moment, then pulled away. "I've always been alone in this fight. You're right. I'm making enemies. But that's the price of standing up for what's right." Brianna spent the next few days preparing for the inevitable fallout. She knew that the department wouldn't let her walk away unscathed. They were already digging into her past, trying to find anything they could use to discredit her. They were spreading lies, making sure that the media painted her as the villain in this story. But Brianna wasn't worried about what they would find. She had nothing to hide. The truth was her weapon, and she would use it until the very end. Late one evening, as she sat at her desk, a notification popped up on her computer. It was from her anonymous source. "They're moving faster than I thought. They're sending someone to your office tomorrow. Don't let them take you by surprise." Brianna's heart skipped a beat. Someone was coming for her. She didn't know who, but she wasn't going to let them catch her off guard. She quickly closed her laptop, grabbed her keys, and headed for the door. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing for certain. The department wasn't going to stop until they destroyed her. She wasn't going to let that happen, not without a fight. The next morning, Brianna arrived at her office early, her eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of danger. She knew they would try something, but she wasn't going to make it easy. For them. As she entered the building, a figure stepped out from behind a pillar. It was a man in a suit, someone she didn't recognize. He was tall, with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Colonel Stone," he said, his voice smooth but chilling. "We need to talk." Brianna narrowed her eyes. "I don't know who you are, but I'm not interested in talking." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're making a lot of noise, Colonel. That's dangerous for someone in your position. You're about to find out just how dangerous." The battle for Brianna's survival had only just begun. As the department's influence grew stronger, the pressure mounted on her. She had exposed the truth, but now she would have to fight harder than ever to protect herself and ensure that the truth would be heard. Just begun, and the cost of victory would be higher than she had ever imagined. Full Chapter 6. Brianna's hand clenched around the handle of her briefcase, her knuckles turning white. The man in the suit, standing just a few feet away from her, watched her. Carefully, his cold eyes scanning her every move. She didn't recognize him, and something about his demeanor sent a chill down her spine. He wasn't just an officer. He was someone higher up, someone sent to send a message. "Who are you?" Brianna asked, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The man's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm someone who's been sent to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions." Brianna didn't flinch. She had heard threats like this before. It was all part of the game, part of the intimidation, but this time she wasn't backing down, not for anyone. "Why don't you cut the games and tell me what this is really about?" she said, her tone laced with defiance. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "It's about your survival, Colonel. The department has a vested interest in making sure you understand that you've crossed a line. This isn't just a little mistake. You're trying to take down an institution that's been running for decades. That doesn't happen without consequences. Brianna stood tall, her voice unwavering. I didn't start this fight. I'm just trying to expose the truth. The man chuckled, but it was more of a sneer than a laugh. The truth. The truth is irrelevant in a game like this. It's about power, it's about control, and right now you've made yourself a target. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur. You should have stayed in line, Colonel. Now you'll pay the price. Brianna's eyes narrowed. You think you can intimidate me with your empty threats? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and began walking toward the door, his tone dripping with finality. We'll be in touch. If you keep pushing, there won't be a way out for you. Remember, you've been warned. The door clicked shut behind him, and Brianna stood motionless for a few seconds, processing his words. The game had changed. They weren't just trying to silence her with public smear campaigns anymore. They were playing for keeps. She could feel the weight of the situation. They would stop at nothing to tear her down. But Brianna wasn't afraid. This wasn't just about her anymore. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been oppressed, everyone who had been silenced by a corrupt system. Later that night, Brianna sat in her apartment going over the new evidence she had received. The envelope she had gotten from Detective Harris was more than just a game changer. It was the key to taking down the very core of the department. The names, the documents, the financial transactions that linked high-ranking officers to criminal organizations were all laid out in front of her. It was more damning than she had imagined. She had hoped that the evidence would be enough, that it would be the tipping point. But now, with the department closing in, she realized that it wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about survival. Her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. They found out about the leak. You're in danger. They're moving faster than you think. Brianna's heart skipped a beat. The stakes were getting higher, and she couldn't afford to make a mistake. The system was circling around her, closing in, and the walls were beginning to feel smaller. She had to act quickly, but what could she do? The department was already sending its enforcers to silence her, and every move she made was being watched. Brianna glanced at the clock. It was late, but she couldn't wait any longer. She grabbed her phone and dialed Detective Harris's number. The phone rang twice before Harris picked up. You need to meet me, Brianna said, her voice tight. I've got the evidence. It's bigger than I thought. I'm listening, Harris replied, her voice steady. Where? Tomorrow, same place as before. We need to move fast. They're closing in on me. I'll be there. The line went dead. Brianna didn't waste another second. She gathered the files, double-checking the encrypted folder. She wasn't sure how much longer she had before the department would make their move, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going down without a fight. The next day, Brianna was on edge as she made her way to the warehouse again. Every step she took felt heavier than the last. She had made herself a target, and now she had to face the full force of the system. But she wasn't going to back down. She couldn't. She had too much to lose. As she arrived at the warehouse, she scanned the area for any sign of danger. The place looked deserted, but she knew better than to trust appearances. She had learned the hard way that in a world like this, appearances were often deceiving. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes darting around the darkened space. The air felt thick, as though something was about to happen. And then she saw her, Detective Harris, standing near the back of the room, her face drawn with concern. Brianna approached her, her steps slow. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice low. Harris glanced around before speaking. "I don't trust them, Bree. They're moving faster than I expected. I've seen people I know involved in this, people I thought I could trust. They're Already putting things in place to make sure nothing gets out. The evidence we have, it's dangerous. It could destroy everything. Brianna's heart raced as the weight of Harris's words sank in. She had known they would retaliate, but she hadn't realized how deeply the corruption went. There were people at every level of the department involved in this. People who had more power than she could even comprehend. "We need to get this to the right hands," Brianna said, her resolve hardening. "We can't let them cover it up." Harris hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I have a contact. Someone inside the DOJ who can help, but once we give them this evidence, there's no turning back." Brianna looked Harris in the eye. "I'm ready." As Brianna prepares to make her final move, she realizes that the danger is more real than ever. The department's reach is far deeper than she thought, and they will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The fight for justice is far from over, and now it's a fight for survival. Brianna sat in the darkened room, the soft hum of the computer filling the silence. Her hands hovered over the keyboard as she stared at the evidence in front of her. The folder was thick with documents, the financial records, the names, the transactions that connected the department to criminal organizations. This was her last shot, the final piece to bring down the entire system that had been built on lies, corruption, and abuse. Her fingers trembled as she clicked open the secure platform. She had spent weeks preparing this, double-checking every detail, making sure that nothing could be traced back to her. It had to be perfect. She couldn't afford a mistake. Brianna took a deep breath and started typing. She had already contacted several independent journalists and legal experts, but now it was time to upload everything to the public domain. The people needed to know. They needed to see the truth for what it was, no matter the consequences. Her heart raced as she uploaded the first batch of documents. She couldn't help but feel a pang of fear, but she pushed it aside. She had come too far to turn back now. The system was rotten to its core, and the people responsible needed to be held accountable. As the last of the files were uploaded, Brianna felt a strange calm wash over her. There was no going back now. She had done everything she could to make sure the truth would be heard, no matter the cost. She sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. The weight of what she had just done began to sink in. She had exposed the very institution she had dedicated her life to. And now, there was no way to stop what was coming. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Harris. "Harris, I'm hearing rumors. They know what you've done. They're moving fast. Be ready for anything." Brianna swallowed hard. The department was on high alert. They wouldn't let this go easily. She had known the risks, but seeing it confirmed sent a shiver down her spine. The fight was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. Brianna barely slept that night. Her mind was consumed with the events unfolding around her. The media was already picking up the story, but the department was fighting back. They had gone into damage control mode, issuing statements about Brianna's misguided actions and accusing her of using her position to pursue a personal vendetta. They painted her as a rogue officer, someone who had gone off the rails and couldn't be trusted. The smear campaign was swift and brutal, but Brianna wasn't worried about their lies. She knew the truth would come to light. What concerned her more were the threats. She had already received more anonymous messages, this time with direct warnings. "You've gone too far. If you don't stop, you'll regret it." The truth. "It won't save you, Colonel. You're on borrowed time." But Brianna couldn't let fear control her. She had already made her decision. There was no going back. The following day, Brianna went to the office. It felt strange, knowing that the walls were closing in on her. She could sense it, feel it in the air. People were watching her. The department was moving against her, trying to isolate her, to discredit her. But she wouldn't let them. As she walked into the building, she was met by the cold stares of her colleagues. Whispers followed her every step. Some were supportive, others were hostile, but she kept her head high, her eyes forward. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to finish what she had started. Brianna walked into her office and sat down at her desk. She had to keep moving. The next step was critical. She needed to get the information out to the public in a way that couldn't be ignored. But as she started to make plans, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see her commanding officer, Colonel Davis, standing in the doorway. His face was unreadable, but there was an edge to his expression. "Colonel Stone," he said, his voice firm, "we need to talk." Brianna didn't flinch. "About what, sir?" Davis stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "This whole situation. You've made your position clear, but I need to understand why you're doing this. Why now? Why expose everything? You know what this will cost." Brianna met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "It's not about me. It's about the people who have been silenced, about the people who've been crushed by this system. I'm doing this because it's the right thing." Davis's face hardened. "You've done more than just expose a few bad apples, Brianna. You've put the entire department in jeopardy. You've put your own career in jeopardy. And for what? To make a statement?" Brianna stood up, her posture straight. "No, sir. I'm not making a statement. I'm exposing the truth, and it's something that's long overdue." Davis's jaw clenched, and for a moment he said nothing. The tension in the room was palpable. "You're a good officer, Brianna. You've always been one of the best. But this isn't you. You're not thinking clearly. You've already done enough damage. It's time to walk away before it gets worse." Brianna's heart raced, but her voice remained calm. "I've made my choice, Colonel. I'm not walking away, and neither should you." Davis stared at her for a moment, then shook his head. "You don't understand. They're going to come for you, and they won't stop until they destroy everything you've built." Brianna didn't reply. She wasn't going to give in. She had spent her entire career fighting for something that mattered, and now, more than ever, she knew she had to keep fighting. That evening, Brianna went to the warehouse to meet Harris. The tension was palpable. As she entered the dimly lit building, Harris was already there, waiting for her. "They know what we've done," Harris said, as soon as Brianna approached. "They're moving against us faster than I thought. The department is mobilizing." "I'm not backing down," Brianna said firmly. "We've come too far." Harris hesitated. "I know, but you need to be careful. They'll stop at nothing to silence you. I've seen it happen before." Brianna nodded. "I'm ready. Whatever happens, I'm finishing this." The stakes have never been higher for Brianna. With the department closing in on her and her every move being watched, she prepares for the fight of her life. The truth is out, but it's now up to Brianna to make sure it survives. Will she succeed, or will the system destroy her before she can expose it all? Brianna walked through the dimly lit parking lot, her heart pounding in her chest. The confrontation with Colonel Davis had shaken her more than she cared to admit. She had expected resistance, but the veiled threat in his words, that her career, her very future was on the line, had hit harder than she anticipated. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing that the department was already mobilizing against her. As she reached her car, she paused, her hand hovering over the door handle. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a sharp reminder of the chaos that had become her life. She pulled it out quickly, her eyes scanning the message. "They know. It's getting worse." The anonymous message made her heart race. The department was closing in, and it wasn't just rumors anymore. They were actively hunting her down. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Brianna whipped around, her hand instinctively going to the gun hidden under her jacket. But when she saw who it was, her body relaxed, even though a surge of anger coursed through her veins. "Jason." "Brianna," he said softly, walking towards her with a look of concern. "I need to talk to you." She didn't move. "I'm not interested, Jason. Not after what you did." "I didn't have a choice," he replied, his voice low. "You have to understand, I was caught in the middle. I thought I could protect you. I thought I could help." "Help?" Brianna's voice was thick with sarcasm. "You betrayed me. You chose them over me, over the truth." Jason looked down, clearly ashamed. "I know. I was wrong, Bree. I can't take back what I did, but I need you to understand something. They're not just coming for you, they're coming for everyone. You've made yourself a target, but you're not alone in this. You've got more enemies than you think." Brianna's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Jason hesitated, his eyes shifting nervously. "There's someone inside the department who's been working against you. Someone you trusted. Someone who's been feeding information to the higher-ups about your every move." Brianna's pulse quickened. She had trusted Jason once, but now she wasn't sure who to believe. Her instincts told her to stay calm, to assess the situation, but the thought of someone betraying her again made her blood boil. "Who?" Brianna demanded. "Who's been working against me?" Jason swallowed hard. "I don't know for sure, but I think it's Harris." Brianna froze. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Detective Harris had been one of the few people she trusted, the one person who had helped her expose the corruption in the department. But now Jason's words cast doubt on everything. "No," Brianna said, shaking her head. "That's not possible. Harris has been on our side." "I thought so too," Jason replied. "But I've seen things. I've overheard conversations. I think Harris has been playing both sides. I don't know if she's working directly with them, but I know she's been feeding them information about you. Everything you've done, every move you've made." Brianna's thoughts swirled, confusion and anger battling for control. "No, I can't believe it. She wouldn't—" "I'm sorry, Bree," Jason said, his voice filled with regret. "I had to tell you, you need to watch your back. Harris isn't who you think she is." Brianna stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing. She had trusted Harris, had relied on her for everything. But if Jason was right, if Harris had been playing her all along, then everything she had worked for was in jeopardy. She had no idea who she could trust anymore. "I need to think," Brianna said, her voice quiet but firm. Jason nodded, taking a step back. "I understand. Just be careful. They won't stop until they've destroyed everything you've built. They'll make sure of it." With one last look, Jason turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. Brianna stood there for a long time, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The world felt like it was closing in. She had trusted too many people, and now she had no idea who she could rely on. Harris had been her ally, her partner in this fight. But now, that trust was shattered. Later that night, Brianna found herself sitting in her apartment, staring at the wall, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had tried to stay one step ahead of the department, to be strategic in her fight, but everything felt like it was falling apart. She picked up her phone and stared at it for a long time. The evidence was in her hands. She had exposed the corruption, but now the people she had trusted were betraying her. The department had already started their campaign to discredit her. They were going to tear her apart, and she knew it. But she wasn't going to let them. Not yet. Brianna reached for the encrypted folder, opening the documents once more. She studied the names, the transactions, the damning evidence that she had worked so hard to gather. This was it. This was the key to taking down the entire system. But she couldn't do it alone anymore. She needed to find allies who weren't compromised, who were as committed to exposing the truth as she was. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at the usual place, tomorrow night. This is bigger than you think." Brianna's pulse quickened. She had no idea who this was, but she knew she couldn't ignore it. Another player in the game, another piece to the puzzle. The next night, Brianna arrived at the warehouse once again, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what to expect, but she couldn't afford to wait any longer. She had to know who was behind all of this. She had to uncover the truth before it was buried for good. As she entered the warehouse, she was met by a familiar face. Harris. Brianna's heart skipped a beat. She had been right all along. It was Harris who had been feeding information to the department. "You," Brianna said, her voice cold. "I trusted you." Harris didn't flinch. "I never meant for it to go this far, but you're too dangerous now. They're coming for you, Brianna. You can't win this." Brianna's jaw tightened. "I'll win, but you won't be there to see it." Brianna's worst fears have come true. Harris was a double agent. The stakes have never been higher. As Brianna realizes that her fight is no longer just about exposing corruption, it's about surviving long enough to see the truth come to light. Brianna stood in the dimly lit warehouse, the weight of Harris's confession sinking in. Her entire body trembled with anger, disbelief, and the crushing realization that everything she had fought for had been manipulated. Harris, the one person she had trusted, had betrayed her. The shock was almost too much to process. "You've been working with them this whole time," Brianna said, her voice cold, her eyes never leaving Harris. "Everything. The evidence, the information, the meetings, it was all a game to you." Harris didn't flinch. Her face was a mask of guilt, but there was no sign of remorse. "I didn't have a choice, Brianna. You were getting too close. They were watching you, and they were going to come for you no matter what. I tried to protect you. I tried to keep you safe, but you didn't listen. You pushed too far." Brianna's mind raced. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. This wasn't the moment she had planned for. She had thought that when the truth came to light, there would be allies waiting, ready to fight alongside her. But this was worse than anything she had imagined. The one person she had trusted had turned out to be an enemy in disguise. "You think protecting me meant keeping the truth from me?" Brianna asked, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you were protecting me by feeding them information about me, about everything I've done?" Harris stepped forward, her gaze softening. "I was trying to protect you from what's coming. If you keep pushing, they'll destroy you, Brianna. They'll bury everything, and no one will ever know what really happened." Brianna's eyes narrowed. "You've already decided that for me, haven't you? You've already chosen a side, and now you expect me to walk away? To let them win?" Harris shook her head. "I never wanted this, Brianna, but I'm warning you, it's too late. They have too much power. You can't win." Brianna's heart pounded in her chest. Every fiber of her being screamed to turn away, to walk out of this place and forget everything. But she couldn't. She had come too far. And the truth was too important to let it all be buried. "I don't care what you think," Brianna said, her voice steady. "You've made your choice, and now I'm going to make mine." Before Harris could respond, Brianna turned and walked away, her mind made up. She wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. The department had gone too far. It wasn't just about her career anymore. It was about the lives they had destroyed, the people they had silenced, and the corruption that had gone unchecked for far too long. The following days were a blur of activity. Brianna was determined to make sure the truth couldn't be hidden. She reached out to the people she could still trust, those few who hadn't already sided with the department. They were scattered, hard to find, but she managed to pull them together. The threat to her life was real. She knew that. The department's retaliatory moves were swift and ruthless. They were trying to erase all evidence of their wrongdoings, covering their tracks with lies, intimidation, and destruction. But Brianna had no choice. She had to expose them. And if she couldn't do it alone, she would make sure that the people who could help would stand by her. Her phone buzzed again. A message from an anonymous contact. They've moved. Your file is being destroyed. They're covering everything up. Meet me tonight. Brianna's heart raced as she read the message. The urgency in the words was unmistakable. The department was closing in on the evidence she had gathered. If she didn't act quickly, it would be lost forever. Without hesitation, Brianna texted back, "Where?" The reply came almost immediately. "Old Dockyard, 8 p.m. Bring everything." Brianna's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the last chance she had to take the department down. If she didn't act tonight, it would all be over. Later, that evening, Brianna arrived at the dockyard, the wind biting at her skin as she stepped out of the car. The place was quiet, eerily so, as though it had been abandoned for years. The only sounds were the soft lapping of the water against the docks and the faint hum of the city in the distance. She walked cautiously toward the meeting spot, her hand instinctively reaching for the gun at her side. She didn't know who to trust anymore, but she knew this had to be done. As she rounded the corner, she saw a figure waiting in the shadows. She tensed, ready for anything. But as the figure stepped forward into the light, she froze. It was Harris. "What are you doing?" "Here?" Brianna demanded, her voice low and fierce. "I told you, Brianna," Harris said, her face filled with regret. "I tried to protect you, but this is the only way. They're coming for you, and they're going to destroy everything you've worked for. They've already started. You need to get out of here now." Brianna shook her head, her eyes flashing with anger. "You've been playing both sides. You've been feeding them information about me. I can't trust you." Harris looked pained. "I didn't have a choice, Bree. I was trying to protect you, but I see now that I made the wrong choice." Brianna's hands shook, the weight of everything that had happened bearing down on her. The person she had trusted most was the one who had betrayed her. The walls were closing in, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep fighting. "You can still fix this," Harris said softly. "You still have a chance to get out of this alive. Leave while you still can." Brianna's chest tightened. She had no choice. She had to finish. This for herself and for everyone who had been oppressed by the system. She wasn't running anymore. "I'm not leaving," Brianna said, her voice hard. "And you can't make me." Harris stepped back, her face filled with regret. "Then I guess it's too late for both of us." Brianna has made her decision. There is no turning back now. But as the stakes grow higher, she realizes that the fight is no longer just for justice. It's for her survival. With enemies closing in from all sides, Brianna faces her toughest challenge yet. Will she expose the truth, or will the department silence her for good? Brianna stood at the edge of the dockyard, the wind biting at her skin. The weight of everything she had fought for pressed down on her. She had been through hell, but now she was on the cusp of exposing it all. She had no more time to waste. She glanced at Harris, still standing a few paces away, her eyes filled with regret. Brianna had come too far to let this go. She had the evidence, the smoking gun that could take down the department's entire network of corruption. All she had to do now was deliver it. "I'm done with the games, Harris," Brianna said, her voice steady. "If you're here to help, then help. Otherwise, get out of my way." Harris hesitated, looking like she wanted to say something, but she remained silent. Brianna could see the struggle in her face, but the moment had passed. There were no more second chances. The time for hesitation was over. Brianna turned on her heel, walking toward the warehouse. Every step felt heavier than the last. She had fought for the truth, for justice, and for the countless victims of the system. But now, with the department closing in on her, she knew there was no guarantee of victory. This could all end in failure, but she couldn't afford to think like that. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. The interior of the warehouse was cold and barren, the floors littered with debris and old crates. The space felt vast, empty, a reflection of the lonely road Brianna had chosen. The flickering light above her cast long shadows on the walls. She knew that this was the place where it would all come to an end, one way or another. Brianna's phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting the silence. She pulled it out quickly, her heart racing as she saw the message. "They're moving in." "Get out now!" Her blood ran cold. It was from the anonymous contact who had been feeding her information. She had known this was coming, but now the reality was setting in. The department was moving fast. They were closing in on her. Brianna couldn't let fear control her. She wasn't going to back down now. She had made her decision. She wasn't running, not anymore. Moments later, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Brianna turned sharply, her hand instinctively reaching for the gun at her side. The figure that stepped into view was familiar, but she didn't lower her guard. It was Colonel Davis. "Did you really think you could get away with this, Brianna?" Davis's voice was low, controlled, his tone as cold as the warehouse around. "And them, you've gone too far. You've made enemies in places you can't even imagine." Brianna's heart raced, but she didn't show it. She wasn't intimidated. "Not anymore." "You should have known better than to think I'd back down," Brianna said, her voice sharp. "This isn't about you, Davis. This is about the system you've protected for far too long." Davis stepped closer, his face hardening. "You don't understand what you're doing. You're not fighting for justice, Brianna. You're fighting to destroy everything. This is your last chance. Walk away before it's too late." Brianna shook her head, her jaw clenched. "It's already too late. The truth is out. You can't bury it anymore." For a moment, Davis stood there, staring at her, the weight of his choices hanging in the air. Brianna could see it, the hesitation, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. But it didn't last long. He was a man who had spent his life maintaining the system. The thought of losing it all was too much to bear. "I warned you," Davis said, his voice cold, "but you're too far gone now. They'll come for you, Brianna. You can't win this fight." Brianna stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "I'm not here to win, Davis. I'm here to make sure you lose." The tension in the room thickened as the door creaked open behind her. Brianna turned quickly, her hand still resting on the gun at her side. But the figure that stepped into the warehouse wasn't someone she had expected. It was Jason. He stepped into the light, his face a mask of uncertainty and fear. Brianna's pulse quickened, her thoughts racing. What was he doing here? Was he still working with them? Was this all just another trap? "Jason, what are you doing here?" Brianna asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Jason hesitated before speaking, his voice low. "I'm here to help, Bree. They've been coming after you. I've seen the reports. The department's moving in on you. You need to get out now." Brianna didn't know what to say. She had trusted Jason, but now, after everything that had happened, could she trust him again? "I've made my choices, Jason," she said, her voice cold, "and I'm not running, not anymore." Jason looked at her, his expression filled with regret. "Bree, I know I screwed up, but I've been watching. They're going to kill you. They'll make sure you disappear." Brianna shook her head. "You don't get it. It's not about me anymore. This is about everyone they've hurt. This is about every person who's been silenced. If I run, they'll keep doing it. This is my fight now." Jason's eyes softened, but his voice was full of desperation. "Please, Brianna, just let me help you." Brianna paused, her hand still resting on her gun. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she didn't have time to figure that out. The department was coming for her. She had to act fast. "We're done here," Brianna said, her voice final. "I'm not running. I'm going to finish this." Jason stepped back, his face falling as he realized there was no changing her mind. Brianna turned back to face Davis, her determination as fierce as ever. "This ends now." Before Davis could respond, Brianna's phone buzzed again. She quickly glanced at the message. "They're closing in. You're not safe. Get out now." Brianna's heart skipped a beat. She knew what this meant. The final Confrontation was at hand. She had to move. Now, but Davis wasn't finished. "You're making a huge mistake," Davis said, his voice rising with anger. "You'll regret this." Brianna's eyes were hard as she stared at him down. "I already regret trusting people like you." Without another word, she turned on her heel, walking towards the exit. She wasn't sure what awaited her outside, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going down without a fight. Brianna's confrontation with the department's corruption is reaching its peak, but with the forces against her growing stronger and the danger closing in, she faces her toughest challenge yet. The truth is out, but now it's a race against time. Will Brianna survive long enough to expose everything? Brianna's heart hammered in her chest as she stood at the edge of the alleyway, the cool wind biting at her skin. The weight of the world seemed to settle on her shoulders, and she took a deep breath, steeling herself. Every moment of the past few weeks had led to this, the final confrontation. The department had pushed her to the edge, tried to break her, but she was still standing. Now the truth was out, and there was no turning back. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She quickly pulled it out and read the message from an unknown number. "They're coming for you. Move fast." Brianna's stomach sank. She knew what that meant. The department was making its move, trying to finish what they had started. The clock was ticking, and the forces arrayed against her were moving faster than ever. She couldn't wait any longer. It was now or never. She turned and began walking towards the abandoned building where her meeting was scheduled. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind was clear. She had spent days, weeks even, preparing for this moment. She had all the evidence, the names, the records, the recordings. Everything was in place. Now she just needed to get it into the right hands before they could destroy it all. As she reached the entrance of the building, she checked her watch. It was 10 p.m. The time had come. Inside, the lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the cracked walls. The air smelled of dust and decay, a fitting reflection of the system Brianna had come to expose. She glanced around, waiting for her contact to appear. It wasn't long before she heard footsteps approaching from the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Detective Harris. Brianna's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment her mind spun. Was this a trap? Was Harris still playing both sides? But as the detective stepped into the light, Brianna could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She wasn't here to betray her. At least Brianna hoped not. "I've got the files," Harris said quietly, handing Brianna a small folder. "It's everything you need. The names, the transactions, everything." Brianna took the folder and quickly glanced through it. Her pulse quickened as she saw the additional information. This was bigger than she thought. Harris had come through, but the cost of this knowledge was written all over her face. She had risked everything to help Brianna. "Thank you," Brianna said, her voice thick with gratitude and resolve. She knew she couldn't have made it this far without Harris's help. Harris nodded, but there was no smile. "Be careful, Brianna. They're watching you. They'll come for you soon enough. You have to be ready for what comes next." Brianna clenched her fists. "I've been ready for a long time." Brianna didn't waste time. She immediately started, heading toward the car, clutching the folder close to her chest. She had one final task to complete before the department could silence her. She needed to get this evidence to the media, to make sure that it was seen by the public. If she could make that happen, it would be too late for them to cover it up. The truth would come out. As she reached the car, she felt a sharp pain in her chest, a sudden tightness. It wasn't physical, though. It was the weight of the decision she had made. She had chosen a side, and it wasn't the department's. Now she would face the consequences, no matter how dangerous they might be. She slid into the car, turning the key in the ignition. But before she could drive off, a figure appeared in the rearview mirror. Brianna slammed on the brakes, her heart racing as she twisted in her seat. It was Jason. He was standing in the middle of the road, his hands raised in the air. Brianna's breath caught in her throat. What was he doing here? She rolled down the window, her eyes narrowing. "What the hell are you doing, Jason?" Jason walked slowly toward the car, his face filled with regret. "I came to warn you. You're making a huge mistake." "I've already made my decision," Brianna snapped, her voice sharp. "You had your chance. Don't try to stop me now." "I'm not here to stop you," Jason said, his voice low. "I'm here to help. They're coming for you, Brianna. They've already started moving. You don't have much time. They'll make sure you disappear if you don't leave now." Brianna stared at him for a moment, her thoughts racing. She didn't know if she could trust him anymore. His betrayal had nearly cost her everything. But now, in the face of everything she had fought for, Brianna didn't have the luxury of turning away from help. "Where do I go?" Brianna asked, her voice quieter now. Jason hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "I've been talking to some people. There's a place, a safe house. I can get you there, but we need to go now." Brianna didn't hesitate. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she knew that time was running out. The department was closing in on her. "Lead the way," she said. Jason nodded, and Brianna followed him out of the parking lot. They drove through the city, the streets silent and dark, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Every turn they made felt like a step closer to the unknown. They arrived at a small, secluded house on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hide out for a while, to give Brianna the time she needed to plan her next move. Jason parked the car, then turned to her. "You should stay here for the night. I'll make sure no one finds you." Brianna hesitated, staring at the house. It felt like a trap, but she had no choice. She couldn't keep running forever. "Fine," she said, "but we're not safe yet. The moment I stop running is the moment they find me." Later that night, Brianna sat alone in the small, dimly lit room, the weight of her decision settling over her. She had made it this far, but she knew it wasn't over. The department would stop at nothing to silence her. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "They know you're here. They're coming. You don't have long." Brianna's heart skipped a beat. She was running out of time. The walls were closing in, and she had to act fast. Brianna's time. It's running out. With the department closing in on her and allies she can't fully trust, she must make a choice that could change everything. Will she take one last stand, or will she be silenced before the truth is fully exposed? Brianna sat in the small, dimly lit room, the silence pressing in around her. The walls felt like they were closing in, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every sound, the faint creaking of the house, the rustling of the wind outside, felt like a threat. She had always been a fighter, always willing to stand up for what was right. But now, as she stared at the evidence she had painstakingly gathered, she realized just how deep the corruption ran. The department wasn't just a part of the problem, it was the problem. It was the very system that had allowed people like the officer who had pulled her over to thrive. The phone buzzed on the table, snapping Brianna out of her thoughts. She picked it up, her pulse quickening as she saw the message. "There, here. They're coming for you." The words sent a jolt of fear through her chest, but she refused to let it control her. The danger was real, but she wasn't about to back down now. The fight had already cost her everything. The only thing left to do was finish what she had started. She stood up, grabbing her jacket and slipping it on, her fingers trembling slightly. She had made it this far. She had exposed the truth, but she couldn't stop now. Not when the department was so close to burying everything. She had to make sure that the evidence she had gathered would never be erased. Jason was waiting outside, his face tense as he saw her approach. "You need to leave," he said quickly, his voice low. "They'll be here any minute. You have to go." "I'm not running anymore," Brianna replied firmly. "It's time to end this. They've already taken too much from me. Now I'm going to take it all back." Jason's eyes widened. Brianna, you're making a mistake. They're going to kill you if you keep pushing. You don't understand the people you're dealing with. They're not just going to let you walk away. Brianna paused, her hand on the door handle. She turned to him, her expression unyielding. I've already made my choice. The department has done enough. It's time they face the consequences. Jason hesitated, his face filled with regret. I'm sorry. I should have been there. For you. I never wanted this to happen. But Brianna didn't want apologies. She had heard them all before. She had heard them from every officer, every official who had turned a blind eye to the truth. It was too late for apologies. I don't need your pity, she said, her voice cold. I need to finish this. They made their way to the car, Brianna's mind focused, her every step deliberate. The air outside was thick with tension, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. Every movement felt like it could be her last. But she wasn't. Afraid. She'd spent her life living in fear of a system that had been built to keep people like her down. Now she was ready to tear it apart. As they drove through the city, Brianna's phone buzzed again. It was an alert from the media. Breaking, U.S. Army colonel exposes systemic corruption in police force. Her heart raced as she read the headline. It was out. The truth was out. But it wasn't just the media reporting it now. The department was already moving to cover their tracks, trying to silence the story before it gained any more traction. They had already destroyed most of the evidence she had sent to the press, but this was different. This wasn't just about one officer or one case. This was bigger. Brianna had the files, and she wasn't going to let them disappear. The car screeched to a halt outside a nondescript building. Brianna's eyes scanned the area, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She could feel it. They were close. She had no more time. Jason looked at her, his face pale. Brianna, you can't do this. You'll be destroyed. I already have nothing left to lose, Brianna said quietly. I can't stop now, not when the truth is so close to being heard. She climbed out of the car and made her way into the building. The steps were slow, deliberate, but her mind was racing. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about making the department accountable. This was about standing up for every person who had been affected by the corruption, every officer who had been silenced, every victim who had been forgotten. She stepped into the building and made her way to the back office. The door was locked, but Brianna had anticipated this. She quickly disabled the security system and entered the room. The files, the records, everything she needed was there, waiting for her. She took a deep breath as she plugged her flash drive into the computer. As she began transferring the final batch of evidence, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Jason. They know where you are. You need to leave. Now. Brianna ignored it, her focus unbroken. She had to finish this. She had to make sure the truth was out there. Just as the transfer completed, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. Brianna froze. She had no idea who was coming, but she knew she couldn't stay here much longer. The door opened, and 2 men stepped inside. They were dressed in black suits, their faces hard and unyielding. Brianna recognized one of them. It was Colonel Davis. Brianna, Davis said, his voice low and controlled. It's over. You can't keep running from this. It's time to come back. Brianna turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. I'm not coming back, Davis. You've made your choice, and I've made mine. Davis's eyes hardened. You don't understand what you're up against. You can't win this fight. The department will make sure of it. I've already won, Brianna replied, her voice cold. The truth is out. There's nothing you can do to take that away. Davis's lips curled into a thin smile. You think you're safe? You think they'll let you get away with this? Brianna took a deep breath, her hand resting on the gun at her side. You'll have to kill me first. Brianna has exposed the truth, but as the department closes in on her, The final showdown is inevitable. Will she be able to survive long? Enough to ensure justice is served, or will the system destroy her before she can finish what she started? The tension in the room was palpable. Brianna stood in front of Colonel Davis, her body tense, her hand still hovering near the gun at her side. Behind her, the computer screen blinked, the final batch of evidence uploaded and ready to be sent out. The truth was almost there, almost in the hands of the world, but the department wasn't going to let it slip away so easily. Not without a fight. "You're making a mistake, Brianna," Davis said, his voice a low growl. "You think you can take down an institution like this? You don't know what you're up against." Brianna's heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve never wavered. "I've seen enough to know exactly what I'm up against. And it's you. It's people like you who've allowed this corruption to thrive. You've been part of the system for too long to care about anyone but yourself." Davis's expression darkened. "You don't understand. You never did. This isn't about right or wrong. It's about power, about keeping control. You can't fight that. You'll never win." Brianna took a step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to make sure that the truth is heard. No matter what you do, you can't silence it. Not anymore." For a moment the room was still, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Davis didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. He knew she was right, but Brianna wasn't finished. She couldn't afford to be. She reached for her phone and sent the final message, the one that would expose everything, the one that would change everything. The truth is here, the department's corruption, their connections to organized crime, the officers who have been abusing their power for years. It's all out in the open. "You can't stop this, not anymore." Brianna hit send, and the message was out. It was done. She dropped the phone onto the desk, her hands shaking slightly, but her heart was steady. This was it. There was no going back. She had done everything she could to make sure the truth would be heard. The department couldn't keep hiding behind lies anymore. And neither could she. But even as the words of the message hit the airwaves, Brianna knew the fight wasn't over. The department would retaliate. They would come for her. But this time, she would not go down quietly. Davis stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You're making a huge mistake, Brianna. You think you can walk away from this unscathed? You think you can just expose everything and disappear? It doesn't work like that." Brianna squared her shoulders, ready for whatever came next. "I'm not running. I'm standing here. And when this is over, you won't have a place to hide." The door to the room suddenly burst open, and Brianna tensed, her hand once again resting on the gun at her side. But it wasn't another officer. It wasn't anyone from the department. It was Detective Harris. Brianna's heart skipped a beat. Harris had been the one person she had trusted. And now here she was, standing in front of Brianna once more. "You," Brianna said, her voice cold. "What are you doing here? Are you here to finish what you started?" Harris didn't answer. Right away. She stepped into the room slowly, her eyes flicking from Brianna to Davis. "I came to make sure the truth comes out." "You're right, Brianna. I've been part of this system for too long. I made a choice to protect myself, to play both sides, but I can't live with it anymore. The truth needs to come out." Brianna stared at her, disbelief and relief washing over her in equal measure. "So you've been lying to me this whole time?" Harris lowered her head, the weight of guilt in her eyes. "I thought I could protect you, but I was wrong. I see now that I've been just as complicit as everyone else, and I can't be a part of this anymore. I'm here to help you." Brianna didn't know what to say. Harris had betrayed her, and yet she was standing there, offering her help at the final moment. It didn't make sense, but it didn't matter now. All that mattered was the truth. Brianna nodded slowly. "Then let's finish this." The next few hours felt like a blur. The media outlets were already starting to pick up the story. Brianna's phone was buzzing constantly, filled with calls from journalists, legal experts, and colleagues, all eager to get their hands on the evidence she had uncovered. The truth was spreading faster than she could keep up with it, but as the story unfolded, the department began to fight back with everything they had. They denied the accusations, tried to discredit the evidence, and launched an all-out campaign to protect their own. But it was too late. The truth had already taken root, and there was no turning back. Brianna's name was everywhere now. The media called her a whistleblower, a hero, a traitor, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that the truth had been revealed. The corruption that had been festering inside the department for years was now out in the open. And there were too many people who had suffered at its hands for it to be buried again. As the days passed, Brianna found herself in the middle of a storm. The department was fighting to retain control, but the public was on her side. They were demanding answers, demanding accountability, and for the first time in years, the department was on the defensive. Brianna had been ready for this. She had known the backlash would be fierce, but she also knew that the truth was unstoppable. No matter how hard they tried to cover it up, no matter how many lives they ruined in the process, the truth would always find a way to break free. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Brianna found herself standing before a courtroom. The evidence she had uncovered was now being used to bring those responsible to justice. The very people who had once held all the power were now on trial, forced to answer for the lives they had destroyed. As Brianna took the stand, she looked out at the crowd. The weight of the moment was heavy, but she stood tall. She had exposed the truth, and now it was time to let the system take its course. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had been affected by the corruption, everyone who had suffered in silence for far too long. The fight for justice has been won, but the battle is far from over. Brianna's courage has inspired others, and the truth has set the stage for a new chapter in the fight against corruption. But there will always be those who will fight to protect their power. Brianna's journey is just beginning.